Dear Dharma friends and all practitioners, today is a Saturday, the 24th of January 2026. We continue to have a topic, the Bodhi's mind. What is the Bodhi mind? As a Buddha taught us in the sutra, if you lose your Bodhi mind and do all the goodness, that is the wrong practice. Just based on the words of explanations, Bodhi mind is the mind of the Buddha, the mind of liberations. There's many meanings behind the Bodhi mind, but the main meanings is the mind without asking anything, without achieving anything, without fearing anything. When we running after the knowledge, which means we already have the attachment to something already. It's just like when you look at a picture of food, the picture of food won't be able to fulfill your hunger. Picture of food is not a real food. When you believe in your Buddha nature, you start to practice and make a vow, the Bodhi vow, to practice. And the ultimate goal of the Bodhi mind practice is the mind of asking for nothing. When you make a vow, Bodhi vow, and practice the Bodhi mind, without a practice, you won't be able to achieve that Bodhi mind. So for our practice, when you hear the instruction to practice the Patriot Zens, usually we are asked to continue to ask questions and raising doubt. The Bodhi mind is also the mind that detach yourself, detach your thinking, detach from your thinking. When you don't follow the Bodhi mind, you always want everything have to please you, everything have to please you. Even the words, the explanations are going against with the Bodhi mind. And these are the mind of Mara, the mind of the ghost. So when you're not following the Bodhi mind, you will create all of these karma that will make you going in the three realms of circle of birth and death. So our experience once explains about the body mind. However, we have the tendency to run after the words, run after the explanations, instead of start our practice. And if we don't do the practice and just talk about body, mind, and do all the good deeds, goodness of life, we're still not going on the right path. We are asking the questions and raising doubt, even though the questions is nonsense, have no answer. Why do we have to keep asking that nonsense questions? And some people, they don't believe in our practice. They don't believe in the instructions. And they don't want to do the practice. And that is still the attachment on just words, on just the thinking and the understanding. So when you make a Bodhi vow, you must follow the instruction and start the practice right away. When you practice, you will listen to the Buddha teaching, the patriarch's explanations about the Bodhi mind, that will make you believe in your Buddha nature more and continue to practice without any challenges, without any problem. The more you practice, the more you want to practice. And you want to trade in everything, the fame, the prosperities, to go back to the practice. It's just like when you are about to drown in the oceans and you find a buoy to float. So another example of this is just like you know there's a boat to go to the other riverbank, but you don't want to use the boat to get to the other riverside. So that's a topic for this week, the body mind. If you have any questions or want to share your own experience in practice, go ahead and speak up. Kim In, go ahead. As your Dharma talk, I realized that the practice is very important. When we practice, we will be able to get familiar with the belief in our Buddha nature, the instruction of practicing the Patriot Zen from Master Zilak. I read that booklet of how to practice the Patriot Zen. When I practice, it consolidates my belief in my Buddha nature and continue to practice. However, to get this belief and this practice is important, and it's very difficult. For new practitioners, sometimes it's just very difficult to start believe in our Buddha nature and start to practice. Could you please tell us the instructions to practice the Patriot Zen again so we can believe in our own Buddha nature and start the practice? So the booklets that we had showing the direction to practice, that's just like a brief instructions from the Buddha teaching that our patriot, our experienced ones, to give us, to remind us the practice. And it reminds us to practice carefully, continuously. All those are just the directions, the right directions to help us to practice. When we know how to apply that booklets of instruction in practice, we can open our mind, we can open the problem of the ignorance and the attachment. We need to practice, we need to apply the practice in all situations, all circumstances, in order to see the compassions of the Buddha, of the patriot, that help us to practice. So the booklets of instructions is the directions for us to practice. We remember, we knew them, but if we don't practice, we won't be able to really understand the meanings behind those words. We'll have the tendency to attach to the knowledge, the words, and the ego. And we won't be able to practice correctly. All Dharma from our mind, and the practice is also in our mind. The 10 requirements in order to practice correctly. In the time of the Buddha, there are not a lot of requirements like that. But because of the conditions, because of the changes in mind of people nowadays, the experienced one came up with these criteria in order to help us to believe in our own Buddha nature and start a practice. In the Buddha Sutra, when he told us a story about previous life, when he was a practitioner, he listened to the 2 verses of the poem from Mara, and he wants to get the other 2 verses by trading his life only to get the other 2 verses of the poem to practice. So when he hears the Myra or the ghost of the hell to say all karma is an impermanence of life, or the practice are impermanent of life. They are the circle of birth and death. And he stopped there. So when the Buddha heard the verse, the 2 sentences of the verse, or 2 verses of the poem, he want the Maya to say the last two verses of the poem. However, the Maya, or the king of hell, said that I'm hungry now. I cannot say anything else. So if you want to give me your body to eat, I will continue to say the other two verses of the poem. So the Buddha said that if I'm dead, I won't be able to hear. So go ahead and say the two verses, the last two verses. I will jump down from this cliff and you can eat me after I hear those two verses of the poem. So the Mara said that when the circle of birth and death over, the nirvana would be the happiness for our life. So the Buddha just jumped down after he heard the last two verses of the poem. But the Mara was the transformation of the King of Heaven and want to challenge the Buddha. So the Buddha always had the way to teach us to believe in our own Buddha nature and start a practice. For his disciple, their mind are still simple, their mind are still very simple. That's why they hear the words from the Buddha, they understand the meanings behind and start to practice right away. But for us nowadays, our mind are so complicated. And when we listen to the Buddha teaching, we still have a doubt and we don't want to practice. In the Buddha times, the mind of his disciples are so simple with less attachment. That's why sometimes they just hear the words or they just hear the sound of the dropping leaf and they got enlightenment already. But nowadays, because of the complicated mind that always attached to everything that we hear, we see, that's why we won't be able to practice and get the enlightenment. We always running after the knowledge, the understanding, the ignorance, and we won't be able to practice correctly, diligently, and won't be able to reach the enlightenment of our mind. We always want to build a present and of this life and stay in that by all these attachments. We won't be able to put these attachments down and start the practice. So in order to practice, you have to believe in your own Buddha nature. And in order to practice correctly, we also need to detach ourselves from all of these egos, all these thinking in our mind. We don't just say that we believe in our own Buddha nature, believe in our own mind without the practice. We need to practice. For some practitioner, sometimes they practice and they don't want to hear anything from the experienced ones. They said that all these Dharma talk are just a waste of time. I just want to practice. And that is also the attachment to their own opinions already that they don't realize. So the Bodhi mind is the mind of no attachment, the mind of no asking, no achievement. However, you need to really practice in order to understand the real meaning behind those words of the Bodhi mind. So when you practice, you will see clearly and realize the importance of the practice. We don't attach ourselves to words. We don't attach ourselves to only the living and forget about or want to get rid of the death. And for the wisdom one, they know the right way of understanding is to practice. So when the start of the practice until they get enlightenment, that is an ultimate goal. That is the end of our practice. It doesn't mean when we said that it's the end of our practice, we don't practice anymore, but it's just practicing without knowing you're practicing. So in our practice, we also have the precepts, the rules to help us to practice. And it's protect us. It's just like a fan to protect us from all these desirements, all these from outside and also from inside of our mind. So these desires or the temptations of life from outside for inside will be prevented by these rules and precepts if we follow them strictly. So when we practice, the more we practice, which means the more we follow the precepts and the rules. It doesn't mean that when you said that you practice, you don't need to follow the precepts or the rules anymore. That is a wrong way of practice. The precepts and the rules are the disciplines to help us to practice. When you practicing the Patriot Zen, you must believe in your Buddha nature fully and start the practice. And all of the precepts and rules will help us to go on that practice without any challenges or problem. And when you practice, you just focus on asking questions, raising doubts. Don't run after any thoughts going on in your mind. You must have a goal, is the enlightenment. However, when you practice, you just already going on that path toward your goal. You don't think, you don't put in the intentions going toward that goal anymore. So the rules will help us to practice. And also the Dharma talk will, the sharing of the experience in practice will help us to believe more in our Buddha nature and continue to practice on the right path. And that is the way to rely on the Dharma talk and continue to practice. We don't follow the person, but we follow the Dharma and apply that in our practice. So when we practice, we need to be very careful. Kim Hwan, go ahead. As you said earlier about the practice and the directions to practice the Paisha Zen, you always remind us to believe in our own Buddha nature. And this morning, my students also asked you about the belief in Buddha nature. And could I ask a questions about the belief in Buddha natures again, so we can really understand how to believe in our Buddha nature? I realize that when we start a practice, which means we already have the belief in our Buddha nature. So what is the difference between the belief in the Buddha nature and the belief in the creation of this mind? Could you give us some explanation so we can continue to practice diligently? So the words believe in own Buddha nature, believe in yourself, which means you don't believe anything outside of you. But when you don't practice the right Dharma, you start to believe in your ego, you start to believe in the creation of your own mind. And you start to think those thinkings are real. This body, like this body, is not a real I. It's just a combination of the 5 elements of life: the earth, the water, the wind, the fire, and the mind. So when we believe this body is the I am, which means we are already believe from something outside. But for people in this world, they always believe in this body, and always they believe in the thinking of this mind, of this brain. And that is already the attachment to this body and this mind, and that will lead us to the suffering, the misery. And those belief is a belief in the ignorance, belief in the habit. the belief in the creation of this mind or this brain. So what is the belief in your own Buddha nature? Does it mean that we don't believe in this body anymore? When you said you believe in the Buddha nature, which means you believe in the liberations of this mind from this body, and the liberations from all these creation of this mind. So on the path to go to the ultimate goal of liberations of this mind, we need to enter the stream of practicing. We need to keep the mind of no discriminations when we're facing with everything outside, all conditions or circumstances or situations. Our mind still not change. It doesn't mean that we don't know how to differentiate things. However, our mind can still differentiate things, but we don't attach ourselves to those differentiations. If you have the practice, you will be able to realize all of these that you see in this life are just reflections in the mirror. But when you try to understand that this mind is just a reflections in the mirror, and you attach yourself to those words without practicing, you keep practicing and you won't get the result at all. That is not a belief in your own Buddha nature, but the belief in the words of explanation already. So it's very easy to mistaken the belief in Buddha nature as, because most of us believe in the creation of this mind. That's why the Buddha said that don't base on the words or the explanations to understand the meanings, but based on the practice diligently and continuously to realize the real meanings behind these words of explanations. So when you listen to the Dharma talk, you just use that to go back, use that as a reminder to go back to your practice, and you practice, you detach yourself from these words of explanations, and that is the belief in your own Buddha nature. When you have the thinking in your mind and your practice strip up all these thinkings, automatically that is the belief in your Buddha nature. But if you're practicing and you have a thinking in the mind and you just run after those thinking and attach yourself to those thinkings and thought those thinkings are real, then it's not a belief in your Buddha nature, but the belief in the words, the knowledge. For some practitioners, they said that they believe in their own Buddha nature already 100%, and they make a vow to believe in their own Buddha nature 100%. The experienced one said that when you make a vow like that, you only believe in your Buddha nature 50%. Just because the belief had to go along with the practice. For some people, when they're practicing, they thought that they put down everything already. However, they still running after the knowledge and the words. And when somebody criticizes them, they feel sad or angry about those criticism. That means they're practicing on the wrong path. That means they still attach themselves to the ego, to the thinking, to the knowledge. As likewise, Zen Master said that I explained about the practice and I walking for several kilometers and you are there listening and still your mind still not practicing, your mind still not walking on that path. As the likewise Zen Master, when he was practicing, he just focused on the practice. Even when he break the rules, he still go back to the practice. He got punished by breaking up the rules in the temples, but he still don't forget his practice even when he got hit or beaten up for breaking up the rules. Our mind always have a tendency to run after those thinkings in the mind. When we practice, we knowing and realize those thinkings are just outside of our practice. We don't run after them. It's just because we need to practice in order to practice. We don't run after the word, just like Mr. Bang said that it's difficult. And Mrs. Bang said that it's easy. The difficulty or the easiness are from your mind, not from the words of those two people. So that's why we need to practice, and the practice is the main thing that we need in order to believe in your own Buddha nature. Is that understandable? Yes. Thank you for your words. I understand that the practicing is also important parts of our practice.